Welcome to the second lecture, whose title is The Hospitality State, Homes Away from Home? When Telemachus met Mentes, recall in Book 1 how Athena has transformed herself into Mentes to visit Odysseus's house, in particular his son Telemachus. She enters the estate and sees the suitors and the quick, attentive house slaves who were waiting on them. And here we have this couple of suitors you could see barging in on Penelope as she works at her loom, weaving the funeral shroud that she has no intention of finishing. Telemachus is there, feeling a bit sorry for himself, but he has a vision of his father's homecoming. So in lines 115 to 117, the text reads, Telemachus was sitting with them, feeling dejected. In his mind, he saw his father coming from somewhere, scattering the suitors, and gaining back his honor and control of all his property. With this in mind, he was the first to see Athena there. It's strange to think about Athena slash Mentes being a human who is in need of, a drink and something to eat and somewhere to sit. But this is, in fact, the first thing that crosses Telemachus's mind once he recognizes this person. The text reads around line 119 or so in Book 1. Telemachus disapproved of leaving strangers stranded, so he went straight to meet her at the gate and shook her hand and took her spear of bronze and let his words fly out to her. Good evening, stranger, and welcome. Be our guest. Come share our dinner, and then tell us what you need. So Telemachus at this point has a house full of suitors, but yet still, he finds it, deep down within himself to welcome this person who, may very well be another suitor who intends to do ill to his house and to his estate. I'd like to use that interaction between Telemachus and Mentes as a point of departure for a larger discussion about hospitality and homes away from home in the text. Of course, our title hero, Odysseus, wants to go home, and we as readers are thankful, in a sense, that he doesn't make it straight home because we get a sense of the larger world and all of the interesting places and civilizations that he visits. If the story were linear, after the 10-year war, he would have made it home, perhaps with like a few obstacles, but relatively uneventfully back to Ithaca after the Trojan War. He has to rely on any place that he visits uh, as a location where he might couch surf, so to speak. It is a temporary home because all he's thinking about is getting back to his home with a capital H. For him, hospitality is a necessity, not a luxury. He's not on vacation. Today, I'd like to consider in broader terms what hospitality can teach us about human nature. Is there such a thing as bad hospitality? Well, we know what good hospitality looks like. Is there such a thing as bad hospitality? Our current pop culture would say yes. We have the Bates Motel television show that is based on a movie called Psycho from many decades ago. And then there's the Quentin Tarantino Hostel franchise, wherein the guests who hope to stay at a cheap youth hostel type temporary dwelling. Spoiler alert, they not only see the sights, but they also meet with their own grisly death. When hostile gets hostile. Quentin Tarantino's horror franchise Hostel, wherein the traveling guests are killed instead of pampered, puns on the words hostel, as in cheap hotel, as in a youth hostel, and hostile, as in enemy. Here's just one other example. One of my favorites, the season one American Horror Story was set in a hotel, and Lady Gaga was the star of that particular season. Yeah, not your usual hotel. So think to yourself, how many strange horror movies are set in eerie hotels where hospitality is turned on its head? Let's think a little bit more deeply right now about the word hospitality and its etymological relatives. Etymologically, if we look at the word's origins, several of these words I've been using are related. So the word hostile and hostile, a la the Quentin Tarantino franchise. And so are the words hospitality and hospital. Those seem very similar, but you probably don't think of them being related, since one, hospitality, seems like it would be connected with taking a vacation, and a hospital is where sick people stay. But nonetheless, they are related in their words' origins. In Latin, the word hospes means stranger or guest. We have some medieval variants of that word in Old French, hoste, and then modern French. Hospes, the word that means guest or stranger in Latin, came from another Latin word, hostis, which means stranger or enemy. So it connected with the word, you know, guest is the word, well, maybe they're not a guest. They're not somebody I know. They're not quote unquote one of us. They are somehow foreign. Maybe they are quote unquote an enemy. So if you do a few leaps in your mind, you can see how those words would be in the same lexical field. This brief passage sums up the attitude toward strangers and potential guests in the Odyssey. All foreigners and beggars come from Zeus, and any act of kindness is a blessing. No strings attached. So I'd like to take a closer look at hospitality and where it can go awry. So the notion of hospitality that we're working with in the Odyssey is explained by a scholar named James Heffernan in his book Hospitality and Treachery in Western Literature. He writes, classical hospitality, in short, always entails reciprocity, a history of expectation of benefits directly or indirectly exchanged. So that does sound nice, that there would be you know a, an exchange of some kind, but it can go awry. So think of a gift that maybe you've been given with no strings attached. Is that ever the case that you don't feel obliged to at least send a thank you note to the person who has given you this gift? So um, gift giving and then hospitality more broadly, within that very lovely notion, like, has the seeds of something getting turned for the worse. So to return to our example of Telemachus, Telemachus is hospitable to Mentes, who's just, albeit a figure invented by Athena. So there's no prehistory at all between them. Like their, civilizations weren't once at war. I mean, granted, Athena does make up a story about her prior familiarity with Odysseus, but she like literally, appears out of the blue. Yeah, so I think Telemachus must be thinking to himself that Mentes, it's like Mentes stayed at my house. Mentes now owes him one. And, given that Mentes has brought favorable news about his dad, Telemachus perhaps feels like this hospitality is going to work in the future in his favor. I'd like to turn to some examples from books 9 and 10 of when the host gets hostile. We will consider two key ways in which hospitality can go awry. First, when guests or hosts mistreat each other, the system of benign reciprocity can turn into its dark double, retaliation. In Book 9 of the Odyssey, we hear about Odysseus's trip to the Cyclopes. Uh, he is telling these stories in books 9, 10, 11, what you had to read for this week, uh, to Alcinous, who is king of the Phaeacians and his court. So he's not living them in real time. He's recalling them while enjoying some five-star hospitality. So one of those stories includes his stint in the land of the Cyclopes. They are giant creatures who have one eye in the middle of their foreheads. We are told that they hold no councils, have no common laws. So they aren't civilized in the way other groups of people are in the world of this text. But they do seem to survive just fine tending goats, and it seems like the natural world acts favorably toward them, and they're able to live. So Odysseus is there in the land of the Cyclopes, and he has certain expectations about hospitality, but maybe shouldn't have pressed that point in such an aggressive and insistent way right at the moment that he does. Even though uh, the gang isn't quite sure what's going on with this civilization that doesn't seem to act in conventional ways that they are accustomed to. Odysseus decides, like, hey, let me impress upon Polyphemus, the grumpy Cyclops, the virtues of hospitality, and hope that we can get some from him. So they wind up in the cave of Polyphemus. My crew begged, says Odysseus. Let us grab some cheese and quickly drive the kids and lambs out of their pens and down to our swift ships and sail away across the salty water. He admits, that would have been the better choice, but I refused. I hoped to see him, the Cyclops who lived there, and find out if he would give us gifts. Uh, so given that he's uncertain about this place that he's landed, maybe he should have just scraped together some things and stolen this food in order for him and his men to survive. But no, he decides to take a different route and insist on hospitality, see if he's going to give them any gifts. He says to Polyphemus, now we beg you, here at your knees, to grant a gift, as is the norm for hosts and guests. Please, sir, my lord, respect the gods. We are your suppliants, and Zeus is on our side, since he takes care of visitors and guest friends and those in need. So does Polyphemus subscribe to the notions of hospitality that Odysseus has brought with him from Ithaca? Yeah, maybe he wants to roll on in with a nice, cute little present for Odysseus and his men. But no. Polyphemus says, so what? The Cyclopes are not ruled by laws, and this includes religious and ethical codes. So we all know what he does next. Quote unquote, has some friends for dinner. In case this image is not familiar to you, this is from the television show Hannibal, which was based on the book and movie franchise about Hannibal Lecter, who uh, is known as Hannibal the Cannibal. So many people would say Silence of the Lambs is the best of those texts that you should go get your hands on it and watch it maybe around Halloween time. But here we go, having some friends for dinner. Let's note the language used to describe Polyphemus's devouring Odysseus's men. He ripped them limb by limb to make his meal, and then ate them like a lion on the mountains, devouring flesh, entrails, and marrow bones, and leaving nothing. When he had diligently done his chores, he grabbed two men and made a meal of them. So on a different occasion. So yeah, instead of him supplying hospitality to these visitors, they are supplying, like, quote unquote, his daily bread. And so, yes, the men are brutally murdered, but uh, also, if we pay attention to the language of the text that I had on the previous slide, uh, it does sound like he is eating a meal. Like it's a very disgusting and grisly scene, but they also are providing sustenance for this Cyclops. The rule of hospitality has been reversed. Last time I bragged how clever Odysseus is, so let's take a look at the solution that he comes up with. Odysseus uses a solution, which is wine, which itself has a backstory. It's a gift that Odysseus got in return for a favor. He takes it along when he disembarks. I filled a big skin up with it and packed my provisions in a bag. My heart suspected that I might meet a man of courage, wild and lacking knowledge of normal customs. So kind of strange that they've landed somewhere where he thinks, yeah, I might meet somebody who's a little bit unusual, and so he brings this very potent wine along with him. Uh, so then it's additionally strange in light of this expectation that he thinks that he would also get hospitality in a place where he'd meet an unexpected kind of person living there. So hospitality turns into retaliation. So recall what I said, that there's always some kind of exchange implied with hospitality, like you owe the person who has extended hospitality to you. So how does this happen? How does this play out between Odysseus and Polyphemus? Well, Odysseus's wine gets Polyphemus drunk, and he throws up all of the men who he has consumed. Uh, that's just a practical effect of drinking, obviously, but not to be too heavy handed in the symbolism, but it does suggest a reversal of the hospitality. He's consumed the men as a meal, and now it's moving in the reverse direction. Odysseus and his men use Polyphemus's most prized possessions, so his beasts that he tends to, in order to disguise themselves. They hide beneath them. We watch Odysseus hatch this plan, and Odysseus tells Polyphemus that his name is No Man. Here we see Odysseus try to maybe break the chain of hospitality by saying, kind of like, no give backs. You can't uh, revisit your special type of hospitality upon me because I'm like the wind. I'm gone. I'm no one. It becomes additionally funny when Polyphemus then tells people, or should I say, tells the other Cyclopes that no man has done this to him, i.e., put out his eye. Hospitality goes haywire, part two. Pigging out, literally. And hopefully you know the place in the Odyssey that I'm talking about. Heffernan in Hospitality and Treachery writes, second, whenever hospitality turns seductive, it threatens to detain a traveler indefinitely, to make him forget his home or his mission or both. So this is where we meet the goddess slash witch Circe, who is known for using magical herbs. Here she is serving men potent drugs to make them totally forget their home. And additionally, she turns men into swine, as seen there in that image. Does Circe wind up getting a taste of her own medicine? Hermes is the messenger of the gods, plus the god of trade and travel. He gives Odysseus a plant called Molly, the counter potion. He has to sleep with Circe in order to save his men. Once he tells her, "Yeah, the jig is up, and I have the counter potion, and I'm going to kill you if you try anything," she says, "Through making love, we may begin to trust each other more." The men are transformed back into men, only better. So we're told as they become men and not pigs, those bristles all flew off, and they were men, but younger than before, and much more handsome and taller. So here we can see why they, might be intoxicated by the prospect of staying here on Circe's island, because uh, things are, just a little bit brighter and happier. Food tastes tastier, colors look more colorful, and people look more attractive. So this is one way in which we're supposed to read into the text that, yeah, she's seducing them into forgetting about home and maybe making her home their new home. She perhaps wants the men to stay there, Odysseus in particular, on a permanent vacation. And she lays it on pretty thick and makes a convincing case to get them to take this permanent vacation. She says, I know you and your men have suffered greatly out on the fish filled sea and on dry land from hostile men. But it is time to eat and drink some wine. You must get back the drive you had when you set out from Ithaca. You are worn down and broken hearted, always dwelling on pain and wandering. To which Odysseus replies, we did as she had said. Then every day for a whole year we feasted there on meat and sweet strong wine. I'm just saying, don't want to sound like a broken record, but recall what I said in the first lecture. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts. So it was via a gift, i.e., of the Trojan horse, that the Greeks were able to penetrate the city of Troy. And Odysseus is the one who came up with this idea. So he should be the most wary among his party about the illusory nature of gifts. We're going to leave Circe's Island for a little while and think about a different kind of quote unquote homecoming, and that is the visit to the land of the dead that is described in Book 11. Here is a map with some key locations that Odysseus visits in the Odyssey. So he had been up in the upper left hand corner, number 7, Aiea, to visit Circe on her island. And so the land of the dead, which was thought to be a physical place, so there were different theories about where exactly it was located. It is just a hop, skip, and a jump farther there into the upper left hand corner. So that's where our heroes are uh, right now. Circe tells Odysseus to go to Hades, in particular to meet with the blind prophet named Tiresias. But let's just get a working sense of what Hades is. Hades is actually the god of the underworld as well as the place itself. And in Greek theology, and as we know it via Greek mythology in texts like the Odyssey, people are judged as being either good or bad. At this cultural moment, I would say that most mortals wind up going to Hades, and only if you're a renowned hero do you get to go to a more pleasant place after you die. The image here is uh, of Pluto or slash Hades abducting Persephone. So there are a lot of uh, versions of this legend. He takes her away from her adoring mother named Ceres, the goddess of the harvest. While she is in Hades, she eats 6 seeds of the pomegranate, and hence, when she gets rescued uh, from the underworld, Hades points out, oh, she had a little snack while she was down here. She ate those 6 pomegranate seeds. So hence we have 6 months of, wintry weather when nature mourns the loss of Persephone, and then 6 months of, uh, happy, festive, blossoming weather. And that's when Persephone is back again in the mortal world with her mother. If one were going to be a stickler, one might say, how is Odysseus going to get to Hades when it's really a place that nobody visits and makes a return trip from? It's a place where mortals go if they're dead. So how do you make a round trip ticket to Hades, as it were? Very few living people make it out alive from a visit to Hades. So I can recall one or two in other Greek legends, but it's not really a routine kind of visit or even a routine kind of ordeal for a hero. So technically, here, Odysseus does not really descend into the heart of the underworld. He is located more near its entrance and waits for the dead people to come to him. So, as you recall, he makes that pit that is full of a delicious concoction that will entice them, and he slaughters some animals, hoping that the smell of the blood will draw the dead to him. This is a complicated picture of the underworld, and I'll just locate a few points of interest for you. So, Odysseus is way over here, just at the entrance. So, all the way in the interior, we have the Palace of Hades. And then one of the other highlights that I mentioned is the Elysian Fields, where the very, 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 very good, virtuous slash heroic people go when they die. Among the celebrities that he meets in Hades are Tantalus, who is uh, in a pool of water up to his neck, and he's reaching for fruit that is ever out of his grasp. And from the word Tantalus, or from the name of this character, we get the word tantalize. Another person who was being punished in Hades is a man named Sisyphus. So it is his chore to push a huge rock up a hill, and as soon as he gets it all the way to the top, guess what he gets to do? Have it roll all the way back down. And he's got to do the same thing over and over again. I feel like that was my experience running cross country in high school. What do you get when you're done running up that hill? Oh, you get to come back down again and do it over again. From his legend, we get the word Sisyphean, so I know that's not a super a common word, but it does mean a chore that is just like really, really toilsome and never ending. So, why does Odysseus go down to the underworld? There we see him in this image. He sacrificed an animal and he was uh, filling that pit with that concoction that would attract the dead to him. He's supposed to talk with Tiresias. So, as Circe tells him, the prophet will soon come, and he will tell you about your journey, measured out across the fish filled sea, and how you will get home. So from Tiresias, the blind prophet, Odysseus gets some pretty good intel, both in terms of its thoroughness as well as the general prognosis. First, Poseidon will slow your homecoming because you blinded his son being the Cyclops Polyphemus. Second, you need to control your men and don't let them slaughter the cattle of the sun god. Third, you will return home to find your house full of suitors. And lastly, you will die in old age. I've mentioned Tiresias, and just in case you don't know exactly who he is or his backstory, he was a blind prophet, so he can't see physically, but he can see in a metaphysical sense. He can see like the future. Secondly, he was both male and female at some point in his mortal life, and so Tiresias has a unique perspective. So he's got a foot in both uh, the land of the dead as well as the land of the living, much like when he was alive. He had lived for a while as both a man and then as a woman. Um, the legend behind that, there are various reasons why that was so. One of them has to do with punishment for happening upon two snakes who were copulating. So that would be what is depicted in this image. Uh, Another reason he lived as both genders, or should I say, another legend associated with that pertains to his blindness. So Zeus and Hera, the king and queen of the gods, were having an argument over who enjoys sex more. So Zeus says that women enjoy sex more, men do so much to pleasure them, and Hera says the opposite. It's men. You're having affairs, and you enjoy sex more. They say, hey, let's ask Tiresias. He has lived life under both genders, so he says that women enjoy sex more, and Hera is so angry that she takes his sights away from him. And often with the gods, if they give you some kind of gift, it also often has like some kind of string attached. So you might get the gift of prophecy, but no one believes you. In this case, he is blinded, but then gets this gift that he's able to see, quote unquote, see. Scholars have wondered why Odysseus takes this trip to visit Tiresias there in the underworld. Of course, it's a very cool episode in the Odyssey, but I might ask more broadly, like, why is death and the undead such a significant topic in literature? So, uh, I'm asking not so much why is this one of his pit stops, but why is it included in the Odyssey and indeed so many other works of literature? I probably didn't need to offer further proof of our cultural interest in the undead or making a visit to death and then returning. So, the Daylight's End franchise, we've got the Shaun of the Dead cult classic, which I know quite a few people who are into that movie, and then the television series, The Walking Dead. Uh, so yeah, death is definitely very intriguing to us mortals and occupies a strange intellectual space. Death is one of the things in life that is an absolute certainty. And in that sense, we are at home with that idea from probably as long as many of us can remember. We were, scared as a child when somebody passed away or at the prospect of our own death. Uh, so a crib for that you know relative comfort that we have with the idea of death is their funeral as a homecoming, and then also there it's implied that that person has gone to their eternal reward. If we think about the word human and its origins, it is related to the Latin word to bury. So humare means to bury. We can see it in the word posthumous, which means after death. So we the living, even though being dead and buried, is an essential part of our condition, we also can't really know what it's about while we are alive. We can only kind of nibble around the edges, as it were. To return to my previous question about why death is such a common topic in literature, other than its general appeal to us as mortals, if you think of a really good book that you enjoyed, you might say, "Oh, the characters were really brought to life. The author did a good job animating those characters." Uh, and so it's just a hop skip and a jump to get to the notion that yeah, literature can literally bring dead people back from the dead, from the other side of the grave, and lord knows what you're going to wind up with. Do you wind up with a zombie, or do you wind up with someone like Odysseus who's taken this ultimate fantasy trip to go visit the land of the dead and quote unquote live to tell about it? While he's there in the underworld, Odysseus has extended conversations with three people in particular. One of these is Elpenor, whom you will recall died while Odysseus and his crew were at Circe's island. He died in a most unfortunate way. He got out of bed and forgot he was sleeping in a loft and landed on the ground, breaking his neck. So he tells Odysseus while he is there, he's one of the most recently dead people. When you sail from Hades and you dock your ship again in Aiaia, please, my lord, remember me. Do not go on and leave me there unburied, abandoned, without tears or lamentation, or you will make the gods enraged at you. So Elpenor is there. He's one of the recently dead people. He's still being quote unquote processed as a dead person. And his meeting with Odysseus like reminds us, because he's just like 1 foot over the edge into the underworld, Hades, um, that Odysseus himself, like for a hair's breadth, like could be on the other side of that metaphysical boundary. Let me also remark that the living, owe the dead something. So, granted, it's not hospitality per se, but putting the dead in their final, home is something that is incumbent upon the living in this culture. So, the play Antigone, which I sometimes teach when doing English 221, revolves around that very theme, burying people, uh, even though they're quote unquote traitors who've died in a war. Another key figure that Odysseus meets in the underworld is his mother, Anticlea. So granted, Odysseus isn't home yet per se, but he does make something of a visit, quote unquote home, in talking with his mother, which is appropriate since she was, part of his home life growing up. She lets him know how things are going back home in Ithaca at his palace. Penelope is waiting for him. The son is hanging on. The father is kind of a wreck. He doesn't even sleep in a regular bed. Uh, she herself died of heartache. She says she didn't really get sick and her body didn't waste away. She said it was from missing you because you are my sunshine. It was a very touching scene. Odysseus tries to hug her, but she tells him, our muscles cease to hold the flesh and skeleton together. As soon as life departs from our white bones, the force of blazing fire destroys the corpse. So, probably a pretty eerie thing to hear from your mother, whose body birthed your own. Um, Odysseus must have been having something of an existential crisis at that moment. I know I would have been. And lastly, in our three major people whom he talks to, in addition to Tiresias, is Agamemnon, whom you will recall was the brother in law of Helen of Troy. His wife, Clytemnestra, was Helen of Troy's sister, and she had him murdered as soon as he returned from the Trojan War. This image is of Agamemnon's son, Orestes, being pursued by the Furies, who embody the anger of the dead. So, even though Orestes, quote unquote, does good in avenging his father's murder, he himself has retribution to face for murdering his mother and her lover, Aegisthus. So, who was Menelaus? Just quickly again, he was a Greek warrior who fought alongside Odysseus in the Trojan War. Helen of Troy was his sister in law, and we get to hear his side of the story. So, the love triangle that he was involved in is, in fact, represented in the opening pages of the Odyssey. He explains how he got murdered by his wife, Clytemnestra. The floor swam thick with blood. We, the audience, have heard about this, so we feel smart at this moment. There's a bit of dramatic irony because this is genuine news to Odysseus. And then uh, conversely, Agamemnon asks Odysseus about Orestes, and Odysseus can't answer this question because he hasn't been home. It's been 10 years and he's still trying to make it back to Ithaca. But we, as readers, also know about this. Orestes has avenged his father's death by killing Clytemnestra, his own mother, and her lover. And it's even suggested throughout the Odyssey when this story is brought up that, yeah, maybe Telemachus has to, do something about the suitors in order to right the wrongs that have been done to his absent father. As we read about Odysseus's adventures in the underworld, we have to keep in mind that he is not living them in real time. He's in fact telling them to a living audience there in the civilization of the Phaeacians, who are ruled over by King Alcinous. He is commended for his storytelling. They were silent, spellbound, listening in the shadowy hall. So Odysseus thinks at this moment, well, let me cash in on some hospitality. So I'm reading from lines 355 to 362. Odysseus answered with careful tact, Alcinous, king over all the people, if you urged me to stay here for a year before you gave me the parting gifts and sent me on my way, I would be happy. It would be far better to reach my own dear home with hands filled full of treasure. So all men would honor me and welcome me back home in Ithaca. Uh, so a little bit of a passive aggressive nudge there that, yeah, you owe me some hospitality because you're the host and I'm the guest and I'm also entertaining you. And Alcinous replies, I'll read his reply in full because the essence of it that I wanted to talk about is buried in the middle. Alcinous replied, Odysseus, the earth sustains all different kinds of people. Many are cheats and thieves who fashion lies out of thin air. But when I look at you, I know you are not in that category. Your story has both grace and wisdom in it. You sounded like a skillful poet, telling the sufferings of all the Greeks, including what you endured yourself. But come now, tell me if you saw any spirits of your friends who went with you to Troy and undertook the grief and pain of war. The night is long, it is not time to sleep yet. Tell me more amazing deeds. I would keep listening until bright daybreak if you kept on telling the dangers you have passed. Uh, and Odysseus defers because the night is getting a little bit longer. He reminds them about the time, like, no, I'm not going to stay up all night telling stories. But uh, a couple of things there. Odysseus wants the gifts to be able to take home, so he reminds the king about the homecoming. Uh, but the king says to Odysseus, he makes a compliment that brings us back to the first lecture about the relationship between literature and life. So Odysseus, it's important to this king that Odysseus has actually lived these adventures and then talked about them, but for all he knows, Odysseus could in fact be making them up. But once again, we find the fine line between life and literature getting blurred. So that's all for this time. I'll see you in class.